What are some declassified government documents that are surprisingly terrifying?
Silent scan.
Dev lies. The plan after September 2011 to make figurines that look like Osama bin Laden and give them to kids in South Asia. After it's left in the sun for a certain amount of time, its face would peel off to reveal a demon-like visage with red skin, green eyes, and black markings. Basically a demon. The objective was to scare kids and their parents so bin Laden and Al-Qaeda would lose support.
Silent scan.
When the Space Shuttle Challenger was destroyed, it was reported that all 7 astronauts were killed instantly. It was revealed decades later that some, if not all of the astronauts survived the initial explosion, as the cockpit cabin had enough protection to not be breached. For 2 minutes and 45 seconds, they were awake and aware. As they plummeted toward the Atlantic Ocean, understandably, NASA knew that the news of their terrifying death would have crippled the space program even more than it already was.
Silent scan.
In East Germany, a committed freedom fighter and her husband had dealt with having her home raided while she was away, being arrested on the way to protests, and all sorts of state-sponsored harassment. After the wall fell, she was able to read the documents the Stasi had kept on her, and found out her own husband was an undercover agent, and had written many reports on her activities with a bloodless banality.
Silent scan.
Operation Northwoods, a plan for a false flag operation that came from the Joint Chiefs of Staff and Department of Defense in 1962, and given to JFK who turned it down. The plan called for the CIA to commit terrorist actions against US civilians across the United States, and frame Cuba, allowing us the right to invade and depose Castro and the communist government there. It was declassified and can be found online at the JFK library. Terrifying that no one knows or seems to care that this was suggested by our government to the president.
Silent scan.
When they performed a lobotomy on Rosemary Kennedy, due to her being intellectually disabled at 23 years of age, her father arranged a prefrontal lobotomy. At the time the procedure had only been done about 100 times in US. It failed, leaving her unable to speak intelligibly and incapacitated. She was conscious during the operation. They say that the neurosurgeons, or whatever they're called, asked the patient to count from 10 to know when they should stop cutting down. I've heard that they stopped when her speech was incoherent. Saddest thing is that she had to endure it for 64 years. All that because her family couldn't risk any political embarrassment. I notice this is more disturbing than terrifying, but I think it fits.
Silent scan.
This is a rabbit hole of a case, only partially classified by the CIA, until information was released 3 years after initial capture. Robert Levinson, former FBI agent, retired and began working as a private investigator, specializing in Russian crime circles. Levinson traveled to the Persian Gulf's Kish Island, which had fewer restrictions on American passports, due to being a free trade zone, to enter Iran. He was last seen March 9, 2007. For 3 years after his disappearance, the US government was adamant that he was not acting with the government party, only private PI work. After 3 years, it was confirmed that Levinson was acting as part of the CIA, on an unauthorized mission to gather data on an Iranian regime. He has had a proof of life appearance in 2010. Levinson has 7 kids, one of which with his mom that have traveled to Iran find their dad and husband, only to be shown plain manifestos by Iranian officials, suggesting that Levinson had left. As of 2013, if he's still alive, Levinson is the longest held American captive at 12 years.
Silent scan.
CIA involvement in starting the Guatemalan Civil War, which lasted 36 years, and led to the genocide of hundreds of thousands of indigenous people, and set up the country for the shit show that is Guatemala today. Just like Nicaragua, Guatemala is a beautiful country, and the people are also beautiful. But as one taxi driver said to me, 25 families own everything in the country. Corruption is rife, and the destabilization caused by the involvement of the US has been devastating for the country and its people. I watched from my hotel balcony as people came to the lake to bathe and wash their clothes.
Silent scan.
Not really terrifying but ucked up. Operation Paperclip, where after WW2 the US government took Aussie scientists and shipped them to America to do science. Some of them came straight from Nuremberg cells, the most noteworthy being Werner von Braun. Von Braun built the V-2 rockets with Jewish slave labor. Every day they would execute the 5 slowest workers in front of the other workers to incentive them to work harder. Once he came to America, we shipped him to Huntsville, Alabama, where he built the Saturn V, the rocket used in the Apollo program, and got us to the moon. I always thought it was insane that Werner von Braun was born within a decade of the Wright brothers' first flight. then sent men to the moon on a rocket in his 50s.
Silent scan.
Operation Unthinkable. While never fully developed, it was a hypothetical UK war plan that would have started World War III before World War II was even over. It called for Allied troops to attack the Soviet Red Army at Berlin and push them out of Europe entirely, not having the manpower to fight them alone. The plan not only relied heavily on American forces, but also called for the rearmament of German soldiers, who would then fight alongside the Allies. The plan didn't get much traction because public support by that point would be been close to zero, and the Americans weren't interested, since they still had Japan to deal with, and a war against the Soviets would likely lead to a Soviet-Japanese alliance, among other obvious issues with the plan. Not really terrifying, I suppose, but it would have fundamentally reshaped the world that we live in today had it gone ahead.
Silent scan.
Culture mind control experiments. The CIA basically tested various means of mind suggestibility control through many front organizations. The main intent was to improve interrogation methods, but later expanded into other avenues of research, such as making sleeper agents. Tests were performed both with and without knowledge or permission on large numbers, or American and Canadian citizens. While some files have been declassified or leaked, the bulk of the files have either been destroyed or remain classified. As a result, larger statistics on the project, such as death tolls, numbers of subjects, and personnel involved and research gained, can only be estimated as of today.
Silent scan.
The documents from United States versus Reynolds. The short version is that a B-29 crashed, and there was an official report about the cause. Families of people who died in the crash wanted the report, which may have included evidence of negligence that led to the deaths. Because the report was embarrassing, the US government refused to hand it over, and claimed, falsely, that the report contained sensitive information about military secrets. They asserted what is now known as the state secrets privilege, to keep facts from the affected families and from the public at large. Courts, up to the Supreme Court, accepted this argument, and established the principle by precedent. Decades later, the report was declassified, and there were no secrets in. The entire thing was just a lie all along, and the courts went along with it. And the practical result is that the government can just lie at any time about national security, whenever they want to cover up evil or idiotic actions by government officials, and they always get away with it. That's why, for example, people tortured by the CIA can't sue, because our torture program is a state secret.
Silent scan.
The US military has a directive, in the case of a zombie apocalypse. In it states that every person, no matter what nationality or how their stance was to the US before the apocalypse, should be treated equal. Does it take King zombie apocalypse for the military to realize that everyone should be treated equal?
Silent scan.
The Kohen Plan, basically, the Brazilian military, along with Getulio Vargas, faked in communist Jewish Kohen uprising on Brazil, in order to impose the new state that extinguished several rights from the 1934 Constitution. Most terrifying part is, the media was totally on board with this. The plan succeeded, and Brazil went fascist for the entirety of World War II. Not turning Axis by pure pressure of the US just comes to show why the Brazilian military cannot be trusted. Everything that goes wrong here has their finger.
Silent scan.
The collection of UK declassified documents and media references to the same here. These include details of the UK's role in the 1953 Iran coup, and support for SAVAK, and secret collaboration by the UK with Israel over Iran, the UK propaganda campaign, before the 2003 Iraq War, and previous UK support for Saddam Hussein's regime, UK aid for Israel's nuclear program, atrocities, and cover-ups during the UK's Kenya emergency, UK support for Pinochet after the 1973 coup in Chile.
Silent scan.
The UK government's Operation Legacy, in which they systematically destroyed evidence of atrocities they had committed over the years of the British Empire. For example, it isn't really a known fact that the UK had concentration camps in Kenya, where they routinely castrated, raped and massacred people. The government didn't want the former colonies to get hold of the files, so shredded, burned, and buried them at sea.
Silent scan.
Operation Northwoods. The CIA proposed using a false flag terror attack against US citizens, blaming foreign powers, and using that to justify an invasion said foreign country. Sound familiar? Operation Paperclip. The US government snagged Nazi scientists, including Werner von Braun, out of the Nuremberg trials, and put them in charge of NASA. America didn't win the space race. The Nazis did. Operation Mockingbird. The CIA manipulates national and international news for propaganda purposes, and funded student and cultural organizations as a front. In the 70s, this included hundreds of international individuals, as well as 50 agency assets that work for US media organizations. Think about that next time a former intelligence official on MSM News tells you what to think. Also, the CIA can hack into basically any phone, computer, TV, smart device that you own. So there's that too.
Silent scan.
The CIA involvement in the Indonesian mass killings of 1965 to 1966. There was a coup claiming to counter a plain military coup and protect the president. It failed after killing 6 senior military officers, and the president was put under house arrest, and the military took over in a counter coup. The Communist Party was claimed and purged. 500,000 to 3 million civilians died, and the CIA gladly supplied arms and a list of suspect communists to kill. This killed any leftist political movements in Indonesia, and the left is still dead there today. It is still illegal to be an atheist or a communist today. You must be one of the 6 official religions, and it is printed on your ID card. Quite literally, no one knows of one of the largest political massacres in history.
Silent scan.
Area 51 was never publicly acknowledged by the US government until around the 2010s. The reason was because many contractors who had worked there had inhaled fumes, lead paint, and other classified materials, are disposed in a trench on site, and routinely burned, where the fumes could be inhaled, and were dying. All they wanted to know was what fumes they had inhaled, so their doctors could save them. The answer they ultimately got was essentially, okay, yes, this place exists. We used to make reconnaissance aircraft there, but you're not allowed to know what it is that's killing you. None of the contractors survived, but because of their lawsuit, the government finally acknowledged Area 51.
Silent scan.
Alex Jones enters the chat.
Silent scan.